The first time an American F-Day-18 pilot got a look at it on radar, he did not say anything for a moment. He just watched the track. Then he came back on the radio and said, "That thing is not supposed to exist yet. That was not a drill. That was not a simulation." That was a United States Navy pilot, one of the most highly trained aviators on Earth, staring at a contact that his training had not fully prepared him for. Because what China had just put in the sky above the South China Sea was not supposed to be real for another decade. It was a carrier-based stealth fighter, flying from the deck of a Chinese aircraft carrier, maneuvering in ways that made American analysts sit up straight and start asking hard questions they did not have easy answers to. This is the story of how China built that aircraft. How they went from operating biplanes and borrowed Soviet jets to launching a fifth-generation carrier fighter in a time frame that stunned the Western military establishment. This is the story of the J-35 and the program that produced it, and what it means for every pilot, every carrier, and every naval commander operating in the Pacific today. If you care about what is happening in the skies over the world's most contested waters, stay with me, because this story is going to take you somewhere most people have never been. And before we go any further, please take a second to subscribe right now. The majority of people watching this have never subscribed. It takes 2 seconds, and it means you never miss a story like this one. Let's start at the beginning, because to understand how alarming the J-35 is, you first have to understand how impossible it seemed just 20 years ago. China in the early 1990s did not have a real carrier aviation program. They had ambitions, they had money that was growing fast, but they did not have the industrial base, the engineering talent, the metallurgical knowledge, the propulsion technology, or the institutional experience to build a competitive carrier-based fighter. These are not things you can fake. Carrier aviation is one of the most unforgiving engineering challenges in military history. The aircraft has to survive repeated arrested landings that slam it with forces that would destroy a land-based jet. It has to fold its wings, survive salt air corrosion, operate in tight deck spaces, launch off a catapult or a ski jump ramp, and do all of that while still being a lethal combat aircraft, capable of fighting the best jets in the world. It took the United States decades of experimentation, billions of dollars, and the loss of hundreds of aircraft and pilots to figure it out. The Soviets poured enormous resources into carrier aviation and still never truly mastered it before their empire collapsed. China was looking at that history in the 1990s and deciding they were going to do it differently. And here is the part that makes Western intelligence analysts lose sleep. They largely succeeded. The first step China took was acquiring the Vuryag. This was an unfinished Soviet aircraft carrier hull that had been sitting in a Ukrainian shipyard since the Soviet Union fell apart. In 1998, a Chinese company purchased it. Officially for a floating casino, nobody believed that story, not for a single second. But the sale went through. The hull was towed across the ocean to the port of Dalian in northeastern China, and what happened next was one of the most significant shipbuilding projects in modern history. Chinese engineers spent years studying that hull, reverse engineering Soviet naval architecture, and learning everything they could about how a carrier was actually built from the inside out. They renamed it the Liaoning, and when it entered service with the People's Liberation Army Navy in 2012, it was not a casino. It was a working aircraft carrier. But the carrier itself was only half the challenge. The other half was the aircraft. China needed a jet that could fly from that deck, and in the early 2000s they were flying something called the J-11, a copy of the Soviet Su-27 flanker, built under a license agreement with Russia that the Russians would later bitterly regret. China took that license, built the jets, and then kept building after the license expired. They reverse-engineered the technology, improved it, and started developing their own variants. The Russians were furious, but the knowledge was already transferred. And China used that knowledge as a foundation to start developing something new. That something new became the J-15. This was China's first carrier-based fighter. It was a navalized version of the J-11, with folding wings, reinforced landing gear, and a tailhook for arrested landings. It was designed to operate from the Liaoning ski jump ramp rather than a catapult system. Western analysts looked at it and acknowledged it was a significant achievement. China had built a carrier-capable fighter, but they also noted serious limitations. The J-15 was heavy. Its engines were underpowered relative to its airframe. The ski jump launch method meant it could not carry a full weapons load and a full fuel load at the same time, because the physics did not work out. A fully armed, fully fueled J-15 simply could not get off that ramp. Pilots had to choose between range and punch. And the radar systems were not competitive with Western equivalents. The avionics were behind. The J-15 was a capable regional aircraft, but it was not a peer competitor to an F/A-18 Super Hornet, let alone an F-35C. American analysts breathed a cautious sigh of relief. China had a carrier fighter, but not a great one. That relief was premature, because while Western analysts were writing reports about the J-15's limitations, China was already working on what would replace it, and what they were building was something categorically different. Not an improved fourth-generation aircraft. A fifth-generation stealth fighter, designed from the ground up for carrier operations. They called it the FC-31 in its prototype form. Today it flies as the J-35, and when American pilots and intelligence analysts got their first real look at what it could do, the word that kept coming up in classified briefings was concern. Let's talk about what a fifth-generation fighter actually means, because this is not marketing language. This is an engineering reality that changes how air combat works at a fundamental level. A fifth-generation fighter is defined by several core characteristics. Low observable stealth shaping that dramatically reduces its radar cross-section. Internal weapons carriage that preserves that stealth profile during combat. Advanced sensor fusion that takes data from radar, infrared search and track, electronic warfare systems, and data links, and combines them into a single coherent picture for the pilot. Supercruise capability or near supercruise performance that allows sustained high-speed flight, and avionics and software architecture that are genuinely integrated rather than bolted together as afterthoughts. The United States has two fifth-generation fighters in service, the F-22 Raptor and the F-35 Lightning II. The F-22 is widely considered the most capable air superiority fighter ever built. The F-35 is the most capable multi-role stealth aircraft ever put into operational service, and the F-35C variant is what flies from American aircraft carriers. For China to develop a credible fifth-generation carrier fighter would mean they had solved engineering problems that took the United States over 30 years and hundreds of billions of dollars to work through. Most Western analysts in the mid-2000s considered this timeline impossible. China would not have a competitive fifth-generation carrier fighter until the 2040s at the earliest, if ever. They were wrong. The J-35 entered what appears to be operational testing within a time frame that compressed Western projections by 15 to 20 years. And the way China got there involves one of the most consequential intelligence operations in modern military history. In 2015, the United States Department of Justice indicted several individuals in connection with a years-long Chinese intelligence operation targeting Lockheed Martin and other defense contractors involved in the F-35 program. The specific accusation was the theft of terabytes of technical data related to F-35 systems, including radar cross-section data, engine schematics, cooling system designs, and exhaust configuration details. This was not a minor breach. This was a systematic, patient, extraordinarily sophisticated operation that ran for years before it was detected. And the damage was assessed as severe. Now, it is important to be precise here. Chinese engineers did not simply download the F-35 blueprints and build a copy. That is not how weapons development works. The engineering challenges involved in translating design data into actual manufactured hardware are enormous. Materials science, manufacturing tolerances, software integration, engine development, these are not things you can solve by reading someone else's files. But what stolen data can do is dramatically accelerate the process of solving specific problems. If you are trying to figure out how to shape an exhaust nozzle to reduce infrared signature, and you have access to how someone else solved that problem, you are not starting from zero. You are starting from a known solution and working backwards to understand why it works. That is a fundamentally different engineering challenge, and China used that kind of acceleration across multiple systems. The result is an aircraft that bears visible similarities to the F-35 in its overall configuration, the broad fuselage blending, the single-seat cockpit, the general proportions. When photos of the J-35 first surfaced on Chinese aviation forums, Western observers immediately noted those similarities. Some dismissed it as superficial mimicry. Others, particularly those with access to classified assessments, were considerably less relaxed. Let's talk about what the J-35 actually is as an aircraft. Because even setting aside questions of how its development was accelerated, what China has built is genuinely impressive on its own technical merits. The J-35 is a medium-weight twin-engine carrier-based stealth multi-role fighter. It is roughly comparable in size and mission profile to the F-35C. Twin engines give it better survivability than a single-engine design, because if one engine is damaged or fails, the aircraft still has power. For a carrier pilot operating over open ocean far from any divert airfield, that matters enormously. The aircraft features an internal weapons bay that preserves its stealth shaping during strike missions. When the weapons bay doors are closed, the radar cross-section is dramatically reduced compared to an aircraft carrying weapons on external pylons. This is not just about hiding from enemy radar. It is about surviving long enough to get to the target and get home. The J-35 uses an active electronically scanned array radar, known as an ASEA radar. This is the same fundamental technology used in the F-35's AN/AC-APG-81 radar and the F.A-18 Super Hornet's AN/AC-APG-79. ASA radars are categorically superior to older mechanically scanned arrays. They can track multiple targets simultaneously, switch between modes almost instantaneously, provide electronic warfare support, and are dramatically harder to jam or detect because of how they manage their emissions. China's domestic AWISA programs have matured considerably faster than Western analysts predicted. The radar fitted to the J-35 is assessed as competitive, though the specific performance envelope relative to American systems remains a subject of ongoing analysis. The cockpit is built around a large format display system, similar in concept to the F-35's panoramic display. Chinese pilots flying the J-35 are receiving information in a fused, integrated format rather than reading raw data from individual gauges and instruments. This changes how fast decisions can be made. In a modern air combat environment where engagements can be decided in seconds, the quality of the human-machine interface is not a secondary consideration. It is a primary combat multiplier. The aircraft is powered by two WS-19 turbofan engines, a domestically developed power plant that represents one of China's most significant recent aerospace achievements. For decades, Chinese jet engine development lagged badly behind the aircraft programs it was supposed to support. China had the airframes. They did not have competitive engines to put in them. The J-15, for example, still depends heavily on imported or reverse-engineered Russian engines. The WS-19 program represents a genuine domestic capability breakthrough. It is not yet assessed as equivalent to the most advanced American turbofan designs, but the performance gap has narrowed substantially, and the trend line is moving in one direction only. The J-35 is designed to operate from China's newer carriers, particularly the Fujian, which is China's first carrier equipped with an electromagnetic catapult launch system rather than a ski jump ramp. This is enormously significant. The electromagnetic catapult, similar in concept to the electromagnetic aircraft launch system installed on the USS Gerald R. Ford, allows aircraft to launch at full weight with full fuel and full weapons loads. The physics constraint that limited the J-15 simply does not apply to J-35 operations from the Fujian. A fully armed, fully fueled J-35 can be put into the sky with its complete combat capability intact. That changes the tactical math in every engagement scenario across the Western Pacific. Now let's talk about why American pilots reacted the way they did. Because it is one thing to read a technical specifications sheet about a foreign aircraft. It is another thing entirely to be sitting in the cockpit of an FDA-18 Super Hornet or an EA-18G Growler and have your systems tell you that something out there is radiating in ways that your threat library does not have a clean answer for. American carrier air-wing pilots train extensively against simulated threats. They fly against aggressor squadrons that replicate the tactics and signatures of potential adversaries. They run software simulations. They study intelligence assessments. They know what Russian Su-30s and Su-35s look and feel like on radar. They know the signature profiles of older Chinese aircraft. The J-35 is different. And the difference is not just about stealth. Stealth is actually only one dimension of the problem. What alarmed American pilots most immediately was not the aircraft's reduced radar signature in isolation. It was the combination of that reduced signature with the sensor package behind it. An aircraft that is hard to see on radar, but is carrying an ASEA radar of its own, an infrared search and track system, and a data link that connects it to other assets, can detect and engage you before you detect it. That is not a theoretical concern. That is a reversal of the tactical situation that American carrier aviation has enjoyed for generations. American pilots have almost always operated with the assumption that their sensors were superior to their adversaries. They could see farther, track more targets, make faster decisions, and engage at longer ranges. The J-35 threatens that assumption in a way that older Chinese fighters simply did not. In training exercises, American pilots running simulations against a notional J-35 threat have encountered engagement scenarios where they received missile warning indications without having achieved a weapons quality track on the adversary first. That scenario, where you are being shot at by something you cannot clearly see, is the nightmare scenario for any fighter pilot. It is the situation that the F-22 and F-35 programs were specifically designed to prevent from happening to American pilots. And now it is potentially happening from the other direction. There is another dimension of this that does not get discussed enough, and that is what the J-35 means for the employment of American carriers themselves. The aircraft carrier is the centerpiece of American naval power projection. The Carrier Strike Group, with its destroyer escorts, its submarine consort, its cruiser, and its air wing, is how the United States projects military power globally. The credibility of that power projection depends on the assumption that the aircraft flying from that carrier can survive in the threat environment they are flying into. For decades, that assumption was solid. American carrier air wings flying F-14s, then F-A118s, then Super Hornets, operated in environments where no adversary had a credible counter to what they were doing. The Gulf War proved it. Operation Allied Force proved it. Operations over Iraq and Afghanistan confirmed it. But the Pacific is a different environment. China has built a layered anti-access and area denial system, what strategists call A2/AD, that combines land-based ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, advanced surface-to-air missile systems, submarines, surface combatants, and now carrier-based aviation into an integrated network designed specifically to make American carrier operations in the Western Pacific extremely costly. The J-35 is the aviation component of that network, and it changes the calculus in a specific and important way. Previous Chinese carrier aviation could be largely discounted when planning American strike operations because the J-15's limitations were well understood. Its performance envelope was known. American pilots knew how to fight it. The J-35 cannot be discounted in the same way. It has to be planned around. It changes the threat model. It changes how American commanders have to think about putting carriers in certain places. And that means China has already won something significant. Not a battle, but a constraint. They have added a serious consideration to American planning that did not exist before. That is real strategic value, even before a single J-35 has fired a shot in anger. Let's pull back for a moment and talk about the broader program context, because the J-35 does not exist in isolation. It is part of a pattern of Chinese military aviation development that has been accelerating at a rate that continues to surprise Western analysts. China flew its first fifth-generation aircraft, the J-20, in 2011. Let that date sit for a moment. 2011. The J-20 is a large twin-engine fighter designed primarily for long-range air superiority and strike missions. It entered operational service with the People's Liberation Army Air Force in 2017. It carries an AESA radar, has an internal weapons bay, and is built around a stealth-optimized airframe. Its existence was acknowledged by then Secretary of Defense Robert Gates while he was literally visiting Beijing in January 2011, when the Chinese flew the prototype during his meeting with Chinese officials. Whether that was a deliberate message or a coincidence of timing, the effect was the same. The United States was looking at something it had not expected to see for years. The J-20 was followed by the J-35 program, which demonstrated that China was not content with fifth-generation capability only in land-based aviation. They wanted it at sea. And beyond the J-35, there are indications of even more advanced programs in development. Chinese aviation programs move through their development cycles with a speed that reflects both enormous financial investment and a centralized decision-making structure that can commit to a program and fund it without the budget cycles and political negotiations that slow American procurement. The United States spent decades and enormous sums developing the F-35 through a procurement process that was revised, restructured, and politically complicated at every stage. China watches that process, learns from it, and designs their procurement to avoid its failure modes. That is not a coincidence. That is deliberate strategic learning. The industrial base behind the J-35 is worth examining in some detail, because the aircraft did not emerge from a vacuum. It emerged from an aviation industrial system that China has been systematically building for 30 years. The Shenyang Aircraft Corporation, which leads the J-35 program, is one of China's premier military aviation design bureaus. It has relationships with universities, research institutes, materials science programs, and manufacturing facilities across China. The talent pipeline feeding into that system includes tens of thousands of Chinese aerospace engineers, many of whom received graduate education at American and European universities before returning to China to work on programs like this one. The United States has, in recent years, begun restricting Chinese nationals from certain sensitive academic programs in recognition of this dynamic. But the talent that was trained in previous decades is already in place, already working, already contributing to programs like the J-35. Closing the door after a significant number of people have already walked through it is a limited measure. The industrial and human capital investment China made in aerospace over the past 3 decades is now bearing the kind of fruit that produces carrier-based stealth fighters on timelines that alarm American planners. Now let's talk about the man who has to fly into a threat environment that includes the J-35. Because behind every weapons system, behind every classified briefing and strategic assessment, there is a human being strapped into a cockpit, making decisions in fractions of seconds under enormous stress. American carrier pilots know what they are potentially flying against. They read the threat assessments, they run the simulations, they talk to each other about what the numbers mean, and to a person, what they will tell you, those who are willing to talk about it at all, is that the J-35 represents a different kind of challenge than anything they have faced before. It is not that it is necessarily better than the F-35C in every dimension. Most assessments suggest the F-35C still holds meaningful advantages in stealth optimization, sensor fusion maturity, and the overall integration of its systems. American electronic warfare remains a significant advantage. The data links connecting American aircraft to each other and to the broader joint force are more mature and more capable than Chinese equivalents, but the margin is narrower than it has ever been, and narrow margins in air combat are not comfortable places to operate. The history of air combat is full of cases where a slight performance disadvantage became decisive under specific conditions. The F-86 Sabre was superior to the MiG-15 in most respects, but under certain conditions at certain altitudes the MiG could be dangerous. American pilots in Vietnam found themselves in situations where the performance envelopes of their aircraft did not match the tactical environment they encountered. Margins matter. The direction of travel matters. And right now, the direction of travel in Chinese carrier aviation is upward, rapidly, and in ways that are compressing timelines that Western planners had counted on to maintain their advantage. There is a specific operational scenario that American military planners spend considerable time analyzing. It involves a conflict over Taiwan. China claims Taiwan as its sovereign territory and has never renounced the use of force to achieve reunification. Taiwan considers itself a self-governing democracy and has no interest in political absorption by Beijing. The United States maintains a policy of strategic ambiguity regarding Taiwan's defense, but has sold Taiwan billions of dollars in military equipment and has maintained the institutional relationships and basing arrangements that would be required to respond militarily to a Chinese attack. In a conflict scenario over Taiwan, American carriers would be a central element of any military response. They would need to operate in the Western Pacific, within range of China's layered A2/AD systems, in order to put aircraft over the Taiwan Strait. Those aircraft would be operating against a threat environment that includes the J-35. Chinese carriers equipped with J-35s would not be sitting passively. They would be operating to contest American air superiority, to complicate American strike packages, to force American planners to account for threats from multiple directions rather than just from land-based systems. Every resource the United States has to allocate to neutralizing Chinese carrier aviation is a resource it is not putting towards strike missions or defensive tasks. That is the strategic logic behind the J-35 program as viewed from Beijing. It does not have to defeat the F-35C in a one-on-one engagement to be strategically valuable. It has to be credible enough to force American planners to account for it, and it has achieved that threshold. The pilot training program China has built around the J-35 is another dimension of this story that deserves attention. An aircraft is only as good as the people flying it. And for decades, Chinese carrier aviation struggled with the training pipeline as much as the hardware. Landing on a carrier is genuinely one of the hardest things a military pilot can be asked to do. The window is narrow, the deck is moving, the approach speed is high, the consequence of error is catastrophic. American carrier pilots spend years building up to their first arrested landing, starting in simulators, moving to field carrier landing practice on land runways, and only then transitioning to actual shipboard operations. China has built an extensive carrier aviation training infrastructure that mirrors this approach. They built a land-based carrier deck simulator called the NITCA-type facility. They have developed their own field carrier landing practice programs. They have accumulated years of actual at-sea experience with the Liaoning and Shandong, their first two carriers. The pilots qualifying to fly J-35s from the Fujian are not doing so for the first time. They are building on an institutional base of carrier aviation experience that, while younger than the American equivalent, is no longer negligible. The average Chinese carrier pilot today is better than the average Chinese carrier pilot was 10 years ago. That trend continues, and it means the J-35 is not just a capable aircraft on paper. It is increasingly being flown by pilots with genuine carrier aviation experience and tactical training designed to exploit the aircraft's specific capabilities against American threats. Let's talk about the Fujian specifically, because this carrier deserves its own treatment. The Fujian is China's third aircraft carrier and its first truly indigenous design. It does not trace its lineage to a Soviet hull. It was designed from scratch by Chinese engineers based on decades of accumulated experience with the Liaoning and Shandong programs. At roughly 80,000 tons displacement, it is significantly larger than its predecessors. It features the electromagnetic catapult system. It has a full-length angled flight deck that allows simultaneous launch and recovery operations. It is equipped with advanced arresting gear. The overall layout and capability of the Fujian represent a genuine generational leap from China's previous carriers. It is not a Nimitz-class equivalent. American nuclear supercarriers are larger, more powerful, more capable, and carry bigger air wings. But the Fujian is not trying to match a Nimitz class. It is trying to be competitive in the Western Pacific operating environment. It is trying to support J-35 operations across the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, and potentially beyond. And it represents China's clearest statement that carrier aviation is not an experimental program for them. It is a cornerstone of their naval strategy going forward. A fourth carrier is already reported to be under construction. China is not building one carrier. China is building a carrier fleet. The broader strategic competition that the J-35 represents is worth stepping back to understand in full. In the immediate aftermath of the Cold War, the United States enjoyed what strategists called a unipolar moment. There was no military competitor that could contest American power globally. No country had the aircraft, the ships, the command and control, or the industrial base to fight the United States in its areas of military advantage. That moment lasted roughly 20 years. It is over now. China has spent those 20 years studying American military power, identifying its dependencies and vulnerabilities, and building systems specifically designed to exploit those vulnerabilities. The J-35 is one result of that effort. The DF-21D carrier-killing ballistic missile is another. The network of artificial island bases in the South China Sea is another. The advanced submarine fleet is another. Individually, each of these capabilities is a challenge. Collectively, they represent a strategic environment that is fundamentally different from anything American naval planners faced during the decades when they could move carriers into any ocean in the world without serious opposition. None of this means that the United States has lost its military advantage. It has not. The F-35C is still a more mature and in most critical respects more capable aircraft than the J-35. American carrier pilots are still better trained on average than their Chinese counterparts, because the United States has been doing this for longer and has built deeper institutional knowledge. American electronic warfare systems remain superior. The overall network that American carriers operate within, the joint force connectivity, the space-based intelligence and surveillance, the submarine force, the surface fleet, is still more capable than China's equivalent. But the United States is no longer playing in an uncontested space. It is playing against a peer competitor that is getting better every year, that learns from its mistakes faster than it used to, and that is absolutely committed to achieving dominance in what it regards as its home waters. The response to the J-35 from the American side is worth examining because it tells you something about how seriously the threat is being taken. The Navy has accelerated certain aspects of the F-35C integration into carrier air wings. The program to equip carrier air wings with a higher proportion of F-35Cs relative to legacy F.A-18s has been moving forward with greater urgency. The Navy is also investing heavily in the Next Generation Air Dominance program, known as NEAG, which is intended to produce a sixth-generation carrier-based fighter to replace the F.A-18 Super Hornet in the 2030s. The existence of the J-35 and the pace of Chinese aerospace development are explicitly part of the threat calculus driving the NOD program timeline. American naval aviation planners have looked at what China has achieved and concluded that the margin they previously counted on is no longer sufficient to guarantee success in a high-end conflict. That is a significant institutional acknowledgement. The Navy is not an organization that makes that kind of acknowledgement easily. When the institutional response to a foreign aircraft program includes accelerating your own next-generation fighter development, that is the clearest possible signal of how seriously the threat is being assessed. The electronic warfare community has similarly intensified its analysis of J-35 emissions signatures, radar characteristics, and communication patterns. Understanding how to detect and defeat a stealth aircraft requires enormous intelligence investment. Every flight test, every at-sea operation, every publicly released photograph of the J-35 is analyzed by teams of specialists looking for technical data that can inform detection and engagement strategies. This is the unglamorous, but absolutely essential work that happens in the background of the high-profile story about stealth fighters and aircraft carriers. There is a human dimension to this competition that often gets lost in the technical discussion. The pilots and sailors on both sides of this competition are professionals. They are doing a job. They are following orders from governments that have put them in a position of potential conflict with each other. American carrier pilots, when they talk about Chinese aviators, generally do so with a degree of professional respect. You do not get to fly a carrier-based stealth fighter without being genuinely excellent at what you do. The selection and training pipelines are brutal on both sides. The people who make it through to fly these aircraft are among the most capable aviators their respective countries can produce, and they are training, right now, to potentially fight each other over the waters of the Western Pacific. That is the real weight of this story. Not the radar cross-sections and the engine thrust figures and the weapons carriage specifications. The real weight is that human beings are training to fight human beings in a conflict that nobody wants, but that the systems of great power competition are making increasingly conceivable. The J-35 exists because China decided that carrier aviation was essential to its strategic position. The F-35C exists because the United States decided that maintaining air dominance was essential to its strategic position. Both of those decisions are rational from the perspective of their respective governments. The collision of those decisions, if it ever comes, will be resolved by pilots, not by procurement offices or strategy documents. Let's talk about what the next 10 years likely hold. Because the J-35 that exists today is not the final form of Chinese carrier aviation. It is the beginning of a mature carrier aviation program, not the endpoint. China is reportedly already working on advanced variants of the J-35, with improved engines, upgraded avionics, and enhanced stealth features. The WS-19 engine is expected to continue improving in thrust-to-weight ratio and reliability as China's jet engine manufacturing matures. The sensor fusion and avionics software, which is a genuine current weakness relative to American systems, will improve as Chinese defense software engineering continues its rapid development trajectory. The pilot training base will deepen as more aviators accumulate actual at-sea experience on the Fujian and on subsequent carriers. And the fourth carrier, when it enters service, will be operating J-35s alongside the Fujian, giving China a two-carrier capability in the region simultaneously, something that was not conceivable 10 years ago. The trajectory is clear. China is building a blue water carrier aviation capability that, within the next 10 to 15 years, will be competitive with American carrier aviation in the Western Pacific in ways that require genuine operational planning to address, rather than being dismissed as aspirational. This is not alarmism. This is an assessment shared by serious military analysts across the political spectrum who have studied the program in detail. The debate is not whether China is developing a credible carrier aviation capability. That debate is over. The debate now is about exactly how capable it is, how quickly it will mature, and what the United States needs to do to maintain the advantages that matter most in a potential high-end conflict. The intelligence dimension of this story has not been fully told publicly and likely never will be. But it is worth acknowledging that the J-35 program exists within a context of one of the most intensive military intelligence competitions in history. Both sides are working hard to understand the other's capabilities. The United States flies reconnaissance missions. It operates surveillance ships. It tasks satellites. It uses cyber intelligence. It debriefs defectors and examines open-source technical data. China does the same, and has demonstrated a particular expertise in cyber-enabled theft of technical information that has cost American defense programs in ways that cannot be fully quantified, but that are assessed as genuinely damaging. The F-35 data breach was not a unique event. It was part of a systematic, patient, decades-long intelligence operation targeting American military technology. And it worked well enough to contribute to the timeline compression that produced the J-35. That is the honest assessment. American intelligence and defense officials, who have been briefed on the full scope of that operation, do not minimize it. They describe it as one of the most consequential intelligence losses in American military history. Understanding that context is important because it means the J-35 is not purely a testament to Chinese engineering genius, though Chinese engineers are genuinely excellent. It is also a testament to the effectiveness of a patient, systematic intelligence campaign that gathered the information needed to solve hard engineering problems faster than would otherwise have been possible. The South China Sea is where all of these threads come together. This is the body of water that China has spent 20 years building an A2/AD bubble over. It has constructed artificial islands, installed radar and weapons systems, based aircraft, and asserted territorial claims that no other country in the region accepts as legitimate. The United States has conducted freedom of navigation operations through these waters to demonstrate that it does not accept Chinese territorial claims. Those operations have been tense. There have been close encounters between American and Chinese naval aircraft and surface ships. And now, operating from the Fujian, J-35s will be part of the Chinese military presence in that region. American aircraft conducting freedom of navigation escort missions or surveillance operations will be doing so in an environment where J-35s can be launched to intercept or shadow them. That tactical reality changes the conversations that American commanders have before they send aircraft and ships into that region. It changes the rules of engagement planning. It changes the force packages required. It changes everything about how American military power is projected into what is increasingly a genuinely contested operating environment. This is the strategic effect of the J-35, not to defeat the United States in a war, at least not yet, but to complicate American decision-making, raise the cost and risk of operations in China's near abroad, and gradually shift the perception of who controls the air over the Western Pacific. The reaction of American pilots to the J-35 was not panic. American military pilots are not prone to panic. It was something more measured and in some ways more concerning. It was the reaction of highly trained professionals who looked at an honest assessment of the situation and understood that something had changed, that the comfortable margins of superiority they had counted on were narrower than they used to be, that the mental models they had built up over years of training against specific threat profiles needed to be updated, that the next conflict, if it comes, will not look like the last ones. That reaction, clear-eyed and serious and focused on what it means for preparation and training and tactics, is the right reaction. It is the reaction that produces the additional training, the accelerated procurement, the harder questions asked in planning meetings. It is the reaction that keeps the edge sharp. American carrier aviation remains the most capable force of its kind in the world. The institutional experience, the training pipelines, the aircraft, the weapons, the electronic warfare, the data links, the joint force integration, all of it still represents the gold standard of what carrier aviation can be. But the gold standard is being challenged in ways it has not been challenged before, and the J-35 is the most visible symbol of that challenge. It is an aircraft that should not have existed on this timeline, built by a program that succeeded in part through a combination of genuine engineering achievement and systematic intelligence theft, operated from a carrier that represents the maturation of a 30-year investment in naval aviation infrastructure, flown by pilots who are better today than at any point in their program's history, and designed to contest the air superiority that American carriers have counted on for generations. When that American F-18 pilot stared at that radar track over the South China Sea and said that thing is not supposed to exist yet, he was right. It was not supposed to exist yet, but it does. And that changes everything about how the next chapter of this story gets written. The pilots flying from American carriers know it. The planners in the Pentagon know it. And anyone watching the skies over the Western Pacific, where the most consequential military competition of the 21st century is playing out every single day, needs to know it too. If you learned something today, hit the like button right now and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one, because the story of what is happening in the skies over the Pacific is one that is going to matter more than almost anything else in the years ahead.